This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. Between two-factor authentication, strong passwords, and a VPN, you try to be in control of how your info is protected. But many other places also have it, and they might not be as careful. That's why LifeLock monitors hundreds of millions of data points a second for threats. If your identity is stolen, they'll fix it, guaranteed, or your money back. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast for 40% off. Terms apply. This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states or situations.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative
on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
You are now entering the Stone Zone. Well, the U.S. House of Representatives passed a resolution honoring Charlie Kirk, the founder of Turning Point USA, brutally assassinated only days ago following his brutal assassination. All Republicans in the House voted in favor of the measure, with 58 Democrats voting no and 38 Democrats voting present. The text of the resolution says that it condemns in the strongest possible terms the assassination of Charlie James Kirk and all forms of political violence, and extends deepest condolences and sympathies to Charlie Kirk's family, including his wife Erica and their 2 young children, and prays for comfort, peace, and healing in this time of unspeakable loss. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, and others voted against the resolution. It's clear that many Democrats are actually happy with what happened to my friend Charlie Kirk. This is why they demonized Trump-supporting conservatives as Nazis, fascists, white supremacists, and bigots for years. This is the end goal of their hateful, dishonest ideology. Any calls for unity with these enemies of mankind must be soundly rejected. At the same time, however, I disagree with those who, on the right, today seek to somehow outlaw or limit free speech. There is, in Charlie Kirk's own words, no such thing as hate speech. As one who was canceled, I had 980,000 followers on what was then Twitter in 2017, when I was unexplainedly just banned. One day I went to my profile and it wasn't there anymore. No email from Twitter executives telling me what I had said that was offensive. No reason for the ban. It was kind of obvious. I was an outspoken supporter of Donald J. Trump, and I was a harsh critic of the Robert Mueller witch hunt, which I turned out to be absolutely right about. It was a politically motivated fraud, as the president called it, a hoax. But I was the target of cancel culture. I was the target of censorship, but I do not today advocate widespread censorship for those on the left. No matter how repugnant, no matter how offensive, no matter how vile things people may say online may be, I'm a free speech absolutist. I think it is falling into a trap. We would be as bad as those we criticize. Therefore, I'm opposed to censorship. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm in favor of yelling fire in a crowded theater. Doesn't mean that I think that calling for the violent death of people falls within that parameter. I think there are obviously limits, but to limit free speech now, that conservatives and Republicans in power, would be a tremendous loss. Meanwhile, no surprise, the House amazingly defeated a resolution that would limited Minnesota Congresswoman Ilhan Omar from serving on certain committees where she would be have access to classified national security information. I would remind you that Ilhan Omar is in the country illegally, that she lied and married her brother in order to gain entry to the country. So my question is not, why hasn't she been expelled from the Congress? My question is, why hasn't she been deported? What's shocking is that the resolution that said that she should not be allowed on certain committees of the Congress was defeated because 4 Republicans voted against it, and one of those 4 was Congressman Corey Mills of Florida, otherwise known as a MAGA Republican. Turns out, however, that the Democrats had sponsored a censorship resolution in the House censoring Corey Mills over allegations of sexual violence and over questions of his military service, where there are allegations of stolen valor. So it's pretty clear to me that even though in his defense he said that he voted against the resolution limiting the committees that Ilhan Omar can sit on because it was a free speech issue, I don't see any free speech issue here. I think he made a craven deal. The Democrats voted against the censorship of Corey Mills in the very next vote. So he traded his vote for self-interest. To me, that's pretty disgusting. This is a congressman who people were talking about as a potential U.S. Senate candidate. Now I suspect that he will face a vigorous Republican primary in his district in Florida. Meanwhile, no surprise here, AOC is considering running for president. This kind of tells you how far the Democrat Party has gone from the days of John F. Kennedy, the days of Harry S. Truman. See, the old Democrat Party may have been more liberal on social issues, but they believed in free enterprise. They believed in capitalism. They believed in a strong national defense. They believed in God. I'm thinking about Democrats like Ed Koch. I'm thinking about Democrats like Henry Scoop Jackson. That Democrat Party, the old Democrat Party, that party no longer exists. That party has been taken captive by a band of rogue, Marxist, progressive lunatics. And AOC knows that if she runs for president, she would actually have an excellent chance of being nominated. I know you find that hard to believe, but first of all, based on history, they would flood her campaign with millions of dollars through Act Blue. That's a payment processing company that works exclusively for Democrats. Canvassing today, just examining the contributors to New York Attorney General Letitia James, shows that almost 80% of those quote-unquote donors who allow themselves to be canvassed deny ever making the credit card or Apple Pay donations that were made in their name. So I have little doubt that AOC can raise the table stakes for a presidential campaign. She has definitely said publicly now that she's considering running for the presidency or the U.S. Senate in 2028. AOC's been out on the fighting oligarchy tour with millionaire Senator Bernie Sanders throughout the country, where the two have been virtually the only two leftists able to garner any enthusiasm nationwide. She's also, I believe, been emboldened by the rise of the Ayatollah Zoran Mamdani, the obvious Democrat nominee in the New York City mayoral race, who is an open radical socialist, one who actually says that there is no purpose in incarcerating criminals other than making victims feel good. Yes, he actually said that. The Democrat Party's in such tatters that AOC might actually be the party's front runner for the presidential nomination. Republicans should, in my opinion, welcome this news. While socialism is gaining as an ideology, particularly among the young people, the whole of the population is still very much pro-capitalist. AOC, showcased on the national stage, could be an eye-opener for many Americans just how deranged this ideology is. Any Republican you can name, Vice President J.D. Vance, very clearly the front runner in 2028, or Secretary of State Marco Rubio, or the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard. Any of them, as the Republican nominee, would both annihilate and humiliate AOC on the debate stage. My guess, of course, is that AOC will more likely end up challenging Chuck Schumer for his U.S. Senate seat. Think about this dynamic just for a moment. In today's Democrat Party, Chuck Schumer is considered too moderate to win. Let's remember, AOC defeated the chairman of the vaunted Queens Democrat Party machine, Joe Crowley, a sitting congressman, in order to take his seat. Tells you what's happened to the Democrat Party of today. Keep an eye out for AOC. She is very serious about running for president or for the U.S. Senate. She would give Chuck Schumer a hard time. I think she would defeat him in a head-to-head contest. I think this recent Democrat nomination primary for mayor kind of tells you the direction the Democrat Party is going and why. I think AOC, as sad as this is, must be taken seriously as a national candidate. Meanwhile, the sanctuary city of Portland has issued a land use violation to the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Facility that has been subject to sustained month-long protests that have descended into violence from Antifa thugs. The notice from the city states that ICE has violated their permit by holding illegal immigrants at their facility for more than 12 hours at a time. Radical leftist Portland Mayor Keith Wilson said, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement made clear detention limitation commitments to our community, and we believe they broke those policies more than 24 times. I'm proud of our team for conducting a thorough, thoughtful investigation and referring the matter to the next stops in the land use violation process. So this is a perfect example of the permit Democrat establishment in America who are fighting President Donald Trump's perfectly legal and much-needed effort to deport dangerous illegal immigrants, starting with gangbangers and others with proven criminal records. President Trump has made it pretty clear that he's considering putting the National Guard troops into the streets of Portland to restore order because, of course, Portland is in the midst of a crime epidemic. Just as the president rightfully moved into Memphis, a place where it is being cheered on by the local residents, he is now considering moving the National Guard into Portland to restore order and to restore safety to the local communities. Right now, the city is also undergoing a major homeless problem as bums and vagrants dominate the streets. Portland is atrophying as a result. The attempt to evict ICE could be the final straw that results in the Guard coming into the city to reverse the damage caused by these irresponsible and lawless liberal rulers. If you're just tuning in, I'm Roger Stone. You're in the Stone Zone here on the Red Apple Audio Networks. And whatever you do, don't touch that dial or stop following us online because we'll be right back.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
And we're back in the Stone Zone. If you've been listening to the Stone Zone, you've heard us predict the upcoming and ongoing assault on HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. in his efforts to make America healthy again. We unveiled an extensive memo weeks ago right here in the Stone Zone in which Big Pharma outlined their efforts to discredit and ultimately humiliate and cause the termination of Robert F. Kennedy Jr., but he has held fast to his mandate. Among the other more important things he did was to fire the Center for Disease Control Director Susan Monterez, who, by the way, is not a physician. But now the former CDC Director Monterez has been taken to the woodshed during a Senate Health Committee hearing, Senator and Dr. Roger Marshall called for the CDC's corruption and incompetence for causing the nationwide increase in vaccine hesitancy as the public learns not to trust Big Pharma and their bought-off hacks inside the federal government. Senator Rand Paul grilled Monterez on the COVID vaccination as she could not admit that the vaccinations actually prevent transmission. Then on child vaccines, Senator Paul hammered her on the fact that COVID vaccinations do not prevent child hospitalizations, are far more likely to cause complications such as myocarditis within children. And Monterez is just another CDC hack who has hurt public health by pushing dangerous vaccinations on the public, in my opinion. With JFK leading the public health policy, the entire debate in America has shifted. Big Pharma, for the first time, is on the defensive, and the public's right to choose is paramount. Parents will no longer be coerced into their giving children unnecessary vaccinations, and their health will be improved as measurably as a result. Yet those who wish to be vaccinated will have the absolute ability to do so. This call on the left that people can no longer get vaccinations is simply not true. They are fully, completely, and legally available for those who choose to get them. But those who do not choose to get them for themselves or their children will not now be coerced in it, will not be mandated by law. And you won't face, as many New York City firefighters, police officers, and public employees were, you will not have to choose between the vaccination and your job. And that is what Donald Trump pledged in his campaign for president. That's what he pledged when he said that he would appoint Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as the head of Health and Human Services. And that is exactly what is happening today. We are for health freedom. We're for freedom of choice. People should be allowed to do what they want, but they should not be coerced by the government into it. That is the new policy that is making America healthy again. I think if you combine that with ending Big Pharma advertising on radio, television, and cable, as well as taking out some of these very toxic food additives that are already banned in Europe, but can now still be found in, say, breakfast cereals and other foods sold in this country, we will have gone a long way towards fulfilling President Trump's mandate to make America healthy again. I'm Roger Stone. You're listening to the Stone Zone. Whatever you do, don't touch that dial, because once again, we'll be right back.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back into the Stone Zone. Last week, President Donald Trump did what many Americans have been yearning for the federal government to do for several years. That is to say, designate Antifa as a terrorist organization. I'm pleased to inform our many U.S. patriots that I'm designating Antifa, a sick, dangerous, radical left disaster, as a major terrorist organization, the president wrote on Truth Social. I will be strongly recommending that those funding Antifa will be thoroughly investigated in accordance with the highest legal standards and practices. President Trump wrote that online days ago. Previously, the FBI had paid lip service to Antifa, talking points and downplaying their threat while surveilling and investigating Trump supporters like me. Disgraced former FBI Director Christopher Wray told Congress in 2020 that Antifa was actually not a group or an organization, but rather a movement or an ideology. This has been Antifa's standard line of BS for many years, using this absurd rationale to get away from their subversive, violent gang activity nationwide. But after the assassination of my friend Charlie Kirk, apologists can no longer excuse Antifa's actions. The public is rightfully outraged and wondering how radical leftists could have gained such a foothold in our society. The answer goes beyond the fake news apparatus, reckless Democrat rhetoric, and academic indoctrinators. Antifa has received combat training on foreign battlefields, joining Marxist revolutionary groups in Turkey, and using that knowledge to formulate cells across the United States of America. To understand how Antifa received their training is to delve into this murky and tumultuous Middle Eastern geopolitical world. It begins with the Syrian Democratic Forces, or SDF, a coalition of rebel militias who control an unrecognized territory in northeastern Syria known as the Autonomous Administration of North and East Syria. Throughout the years, the SDF has received millions of dollars in military aid from our U.S. Department of Defense, as they were one of the partners who the U.S. relied on to stop ISIS from taking hold of the region. So in other words, we were funding a group of terrorist radicals in order to fight a different group of terrorist radicals. Make this make sense. The dominant force within this coalition is the People's Protections Unit, also known as the YPG. That's the military wing of the Democratic Unit Party, a radical far-left Kurdish separatist movement. The PYD is a Syrian affiliate of the Kurdistan Workers' Party, which has been designated by the U.S. government as a foreign terrorist organization for nearly all of its 30-year insurgency against a NATO member state, Turkey. So these socialist Kurd groups have been considered allies in the U.S. war on terror because their politics is seen as less dangerous and extreme than radical Islamist organizations. But as tends to happen with American foreign policy, there has been, once again, unforeseen blowback. Because the PKK believes the government of Turkey is fascist, they have declared themselves to be anti-fascist and allied themselves with the so-called anti-fascist movement around the world, including here in the United States. The Kurds then organized the People's United Revolutionary Movement in 2016 to unite Marxist groups in the Turkish region and to appeal to the broader Antifa movement worldwide. This resulted in the YPG recruiting units of foreign volunteer fighters, including from America, to fight alongside them in their rebellion. Though some of these volunteers were motivated by the laudable desire to defeat the Islamic State, it has been reported that many are Antifa activists who joined the YPG on Marxist ideological grounds. Actually, Rolling Stone published a profile on Antifa activists such as Bruce Belden, who is described as being heavily involved in leftist causes, marching for tenants' rights, blocking evictions, and protesting police brutality. These Antifa activists joined the Marxist resistance movement alongside the Kurds to promote a secular, feminist, anarcho-libertarianism, as Noam Chomsky or the activists of Occupy Wall Street were called. Splinter groups from the YLF, including the International Freedom Battalion, the Anti-Fascist Forces in Afrin, the International Revolutionary People's Guerrilla Forces, and the Queer Insurrection and Liberation Army, that one's one of my favorites, were all precursors to the pro-trans terror organizations now popping up across the country to encourage violence and extremism so children can be drugged and mutilated. Those Americans who joined the Kurds and did not die in the war zones eventually return home battle-hardened and ready to impart the lessons they learned abroad here in the United States. These direct Antifa American leaders and the Kurdish Revolutionary Military show that Antifa is not just some domestic terror organization, but also a foreign-backed entity waging war against the U.S. Constitution and our local and state police. As the Trump administration develops a tactical plan to shut Antifa down, they should keep those facts in mind. There is no reason why this terror force with international connections should not be treated in a similar manner as, say, ISIS or Al-Qaeda terror cells are held. We must feel the full brunt of military and law enforcement apparatus that has built up since 9/11 to eliminate these threats to the American people. Meanwhile, after Jimmy Kimmel's removal from the ABC airwaves, the Democrats have reinvented themselves into champions for free speech and open discourse in the public square, seemingly forgetting about everything that's taken place over the last 10 years. Democrats, including their 2016 presidential candidate, have been openly calling for Republicans to be thrown in jail for spreading quote-unquote disinformation, which of course they mean any opinion expressed that they don't agree with, any opinion that is not approved by the National Democrat Party. It was during an MSNBC appearance just last year that Hillary Clinton said, "I think there are Americans who are engaged in this type of propaganda, and whether they should be civilly or even in some cases criminally charged, it would be a good deterrent." So in other words, you're saying people should be arrested and prosecuted because they disagree with you. One man, Douglas Mackey, was actually prosecuted and convicted for sharing memes on Twitter in the lead up to the 2016 presidential election. Now, many people were prosecuted because they refused to go along with 2020 presidential election integrity fraud on the basis that they provided an alternative slate of electors. This is one of the left's biggest canards, that formulation of an alternative slate of electoral college electors is somehow criminal or subversive. In 1960, on election night, it was thought that Vice President Richard Nixon had carried Hawaii, but Democrat candidate John F. Kennedy's campaign disagreed, insisting that when all the absentee ballots were counted in Hawaii, that JFK would carry the state. In fact, JFK filed a slate of alternative electors, although Vice President Nixon had already had his electors filed, and they were, at least that night, considered to be in line to vote in the Electoral College. In the end, JFK was, of course, right. When the absentee ballots were counted, it was Kennedy who carried Hawaii, but nobody claimed that his act of filing the alternative slate of Electoral College electors was criminal or subversive. This also happened in our own country in the election of 1877. There's a rich tradition of this, in fact. But thanks to MSNBC, the idea of contesting an election, the idea of questioning the results of an election, which of course any American citizen has a First Amendment right to do, and the act of filing alternative slates of electors to stand by while legal fights ensued over the actual voter outcome within a given state was to become considered criminal activity. The Democrats now say that they should receive no punishment for their words and behaviors, and that the culture is shifted in our favor. They should not be concerned about their whining and crying. They're reaping what they've sown. They've shown that they would do much worse to us if the roles were reversed. But as I said at the beginning of the show, we should not fall for the act of censorship. We are in favor of free speech. The whole point of the First Amendment is that speech that you find particularly offensive, repugnant, or disgusting is protected by the Constitution. There are conservatives, there are Republicans today who are calling for a tsunami of censorship against those on the left that we disagree with. This would be a gigantic mistake, and it would be incorrect. I think it was Charlie Kirk himself who said, "There's no such thing as hate speech." I was glad to see the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, walk that back, and I'm glad to see that we will not have a repetition on the right of what they did so effectively against us on the left. Meanwhile, the Ohio Conference of Teamsters endorsed Vivek Ramaswamy, the Republican candidate for governor, demonstrating the massive political shift that President Trump's MAGA revolution has caused in the Rust Belt. Ohio Teamster President Patrick J. Darrow said, "Our members want a leader who will fight for good-paying jobs and strengthen the future for Ohio's working families. Vivek Ramaswamy has demonstrated a commitment to listening to labor and partnering with us to deliver real results, and we look forward to working for him." So Vivek is the type of political talent who can hold the MAGA revolution and channel the energy that President Trump has built up into a permanent political realignment and coalition. He is typical of the type of candidate we need moving forward. Otherwise, we risk backsliding into the bad old days of George W. Bush establishment republicanism. It will take talented candidates to inspire pro-Trump voters, to vote in next year's midterms when President Trump himself is not on the ballot to pull out the vote. Weak, wishy-washy, neocon established Republicans are just not going to cut it. Ohio has been transformed into a solidly red state with union backing, and it's not likely to change anytime soon. It was right here in the Stone Zone yesterday that we broke the news that Cliff Maloney of Citizens Alliance and his PA Chase, Pennsylvania Chase, which did an unbelievable job of flipping the Keystone State red in the last presidential campaign, has now moved into New Jersey to start the door knocking and the shoe leather politics that could transform the Garden State into a red state. This is welcome news for Republican candidate Jack Ciattarelli, who is surging in polls and actually pressing his Democrat opponent, elitist Congresswoman Mickey Sherrill. I have high hopes for the Garden State, but the fact that Cliff Maloney and his army of door knockers are now descending on the Garden State with the assistance of my good friend Mike Crispy shows me that New Jersey Republicans have the first chance in decades to take back the governorship of the Garden State. We're going to be covering that very, very carefully here in the Stone Zone. Thank you for joining us today. Whatever you do, don't touch that dial, please. We've got more hot political news for you right around the corner.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back into the Stone Zone. For 8 years under Barack Hussein Obama and 4 years under Joe Biden, we've been living under the despotic yoke of a grotesque parody of justice. See, what masquerades today as the rule of law is in truth nothing more than a weaponized cudgel in the hands of America's ruling junta. The rottenness of the two-tier justice system was laid bare in the monstrous debacle known as Operation Fast and Furious. Do you remember that? Let us recall precisely what this was. Agents of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and Explosive deliberately walked guns across our southern border into the bloody hands of Mexican drug cartel leaders. These weapons were not lost by accident. They were greenlit by the upper echelons of the Obama administration. Orders for such an audaciously perverse scheme could only have emanated from the pinnacle of power itself, which means President Barack Obama or his Machiavellian henchman, Attorney General Eric Holder. The result was carnage. Dead Americans, dead Mexicans, families shattered, chaos unleashed. When this malignant plot was finally exposed, Congress subpoenaed Eric Holder, the Attorney General, to answer questions about it. What did he do? He stonewalled. He refused to testify. Eventually, he was held in contempt of Congress on June 28th of 2012. But what was his fate? Not even a moment in a holding cell. Not a second in shackles. No 29 heavily armed FBI agents swarming his home at 6 o'clock in the morning. He was protected by the Praetorian Guard of sycophantic media and the velvet shield of the White House. Holder strutted away untouched, smirking at the impotence of Congress. Now fast forward to Peter Navarro. Navarro was no arms trafficker. Navarro was no criminal mastermind. Navarro was a senior advisor to President Donald Trump who dared to invoke the privilege of executive privilege, under which he would not have been required to testify. That was in April of 2022. And for that, Navarro was indicted by Merrick Garland's jackbooted goons, shackled at an airport like a dog, and frog-marched into a federal prison. This grotesque spectacle was never about justice. It was about retribution. It was about vengeance. It was about lawfare in its purest and most pernicious form. And what happened to the courageous ATF agents who blew the whistle on this fiendish operation? Well, they were ruined. They were exiled, demoted, punished for the crime of telling the truth. Their reward for defending the Republic was professional annihilation. And the journalists who exposed Fast and Furious, Cheryl Atkinson, a woman of rare integrity, who ripped back the veil on Obama's gun-running scandal. For her bravery, she was surveilled, slandered, and systematically destroyed by a complicit establishment press and a vindictive regime. Her story, in my opinion, stands as a monument to the price of truth-telling in an age of institutional corruption. This is not the America our founders envisioned. This is a catastrophe. That's a government by the worst, for the worst, and by the worst. And it is metastasizing as a malignancy in which Democrats and their henchmen are immunized from accountability while conservatives are ritually sacrificed on the altar of political expediency. The name for this grotesque practice is lawfare. It is the linchpin of tyranny. It is the most insidious threat to liberty since the crown itself sought to shackle the colonists. Unless it is uprooted, exposed, and annihilated, this republic cannot endure. Thanks to the bravery of Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence, we now know definitively through their own classified documents that the Russian collusion hoax was the greatest single dirty trick in American political history. It was the largest abuse of power in which the full authority of the United States government and the extraordinary capabilities of our intelligence agencies were utilized using two pieces of fabricated evidence, the so-called Steele dossier, the false claim that Donald Trump had dallied with Russian prostitutes while visiting Moscow as a private businessman, and the false claim that the Democrat National Committee had been the target of an online hack by Russian intelligence. To this day, there is not a shred of evidence that proves either one of those things are true. In fact, the documents declassified by Tulsi Gabbard show us it was all one gigantic lie. So my question is an obvious one. Will Obama and Biden and Susan Rice, the National Security Advisor, and James Comey, the FBI Director, and the CIA Director, John Brennan, and Andrew McCabe, the Deputy Director of the FBI, and Robert Mueller himself, the front man for the Russian collusion investigation witch hunt. Will any of these people be held accountable? Will anyone be charged with seditious conspiracy to engage in treason to undo the 2016 election? America is waiting for the answer.
Thanks for listening to The Stone Zone with Roger Stone. You can hear The Stone Zone with Roger Stone weeknights at 8 on 77 WABC. If you like the podcast, share it with your friends and listen anytime at WABCRadio.com and download the WABC Radio app. Hit that subscribe button on all major podcast platforms. Plus, follow WABC on social on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X. See you next time for a new episode, so you never have to wonder.
What the heck is going on here?